In October 1971, a black limousine rolled through the streets of The Hague. Inside sat Emperor Hirohito of Japan, the man who had reigned during the Pacific War. For many Dutch veterans and survivors of Japanese camps, his arrival was not a diplomatic gesture, but a painful reminder of suffering. The visit sparked protests, emotions, and divisions that revealed how deep the scars of war still ran. The Dutch government had invited Hirohito as part of a European state tour. By then, Japan had become a global economic power, and diplomatic relations needed strengthening. For Queen Juliana and her cabinet, it was a matter of political pragmatism. But for thousands of former prisoners of war and civilian internees from the Dutch East Indies, the memory of 1942 to 1945 was far from resolved. During those years, around 100,000 Dutch and Indo-European civilians had been confined in Japanese internment camps across Indonesia. Food shortages, forced labor, and brutality left deep trauma. For many, Hirohito symbolized the empire that had sanctioned their suffering. Though he had escaped prosecution after the war, his role as wartime emperor remained a source of anger. As the state visit approached, veterans groups and survivors organized protests. In cities across the Netherlands, banners appeared. No welcome for Hirohito. Demonstrators carried photographs of emaciated camp prisoners and shouted for recognition. For them, the emperor's presence was an insult to the memory of those who had died in the camps. On October 8, 1971, when Hirohito's motorcade entered The Hague, thousands lined the route. Some waved Japanese and Dutch flags, but others turned their backs in silence. Alongside the palace, veterans stood wearing their medals, holding placards that read, "Justice for the Indies." In Amsterdam, protesters staged symbolic mock trials, declaring Hirohito guilty of war crimes. At several points, scuffles broke out, and police struggled to keep the route clear. Inside the royal palaces, the mood was carefully staged. Queen Juliana received the emperor with formality, emphasizing reconciliation and the future. Prime Minister Barend Biesheuvel stressed the importance of trade and political ties with Japan. The government urged the public to look forward rather than back, but the contrast was sharp. Outside, emotions boiled. Former internees told journalists about the hunger and humiliation they had suffered. For them, no economic partnership could erase the pain of the past. Hirohito himself remained distant. Known for his cautious, reserved style, he made no public apology. His speeches emphasized friendship, cultural exchange, and peace. For many survivors, this silence felt like denial, as if the wartime suffering in the Indies was being brushed aside. Yet some observers noted that simply by visiting, the emperor was forced to confront the lingering consequences of the war. The controversy did not end with his departure. Newspapers debated the visit for weeks. Was it right to welcome a monarch linked to wartime atrocities? Or was reconciliation necessary to build a new relationship with Japan? For survivors, the anger never truly faded. The protests of 1971 became a lasting symbol of the unresolved history between the Netherlands, Japan, and the former Dutch East Indies. 50 years later, the memory of that visit still resonates. The debates around Hirohito's presence highlight the long shadow of empire and war. For the Dutch East Indies community, it underscored the need for recognition of their suffering, a struggle that continues into the present. The 1971 state visit of Emperor Hirohito was more than a diplomatic formality. It exposed the deep wounds left by war, the gap between political pragmatism and personal pain, and the difficulty of reconciling with a past that still demands acknowledgement. Today, as veterans and survivors grow fewer, the images of protests in The Hague remain powerful. They remind us that history is not easily buried, and that the voices of those who endured must be heard even decades after the guns fell silent.